and learn how the team can help you.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
That bumper music sounds like news is about to happen, Robin.
Yeah.
Sounds like new, like an old, 1970s news. Like, we got news coming up.
I know, it's great.
Erik Lee Preminger is on the phone. He is an Emmy Award-winning producer, an actor, a screenwriter, a documentary filmmaker, an entertainment reporter, a movie critic, an author, and the son of Gypsy Rose Lee and Otto Preminger. Yeah, I said all that just to say that. That's kind of cool. Erik has a one-man show. He wants to talk to us about it. It's called Together, Wherever We Go, Gypsy Rose Lee, the life of the legendary burlesque performer Gypsy Rose Lee. One performance only on Wednesday. Oh, next Wednesday,
yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. At the Theater Zone in Naples. Oh,
yeah, isn't
really?
that cool?
Well, maybe we'll go see him.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Erik, it's an honor to have you on the show. Good morning, Erik. How you doing?
Well, good morning, Larry. It's wonderful to be here, or be there. It's hard to say.
And where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from just outside San Francisco.
Oh, my gosh. Well, you're going to have a long drive ahead of you.
Especially at rush hour. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to coming to Naples. I've been there before. I've spent a lot of time in the west coast of Florida. I made a movie when I was a little boy. I didn't make it, actually. Bud Schulberg made it called Wind Across the Everglades.
Oh, really?
And I actually have some clips from that in my show.
Cool.
You know, when my mother died, she left me 17 volumes of scrapbooks and a vault full of movies, newsreel footage, you name it, she kept it, which is what I put together for this presentation.
Oh, very
But I
exciting.
must tell you that the best part of my presentation is the Q&A afterwards, which goes on for as long as anybody has a question to ask.
And are you? How long have you been doing this particular show?
Well, I started doing it about, I guess, 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer.
Okay.
My premiere was at the Castro Theater here in San Francisco, a beautiful old vaudeville house. And it was successful enough and got a standing ovation. For the only time in my life I've actually been in front of a live audience. And I understand now why people like performing in front of a live audience, because it's a real thrill.
So, we learned about your mom by watching your show. Am I understanding this correctly?
Oh, you will learn everything there is to know. Well, not quite everything from the show, but you'll learn more from the Q&A, because then people get to ask all the questions that they might have about this person who's become something of a legend thanks to the musical.
So how did you put the show together? Yeah, that's kind of the maybe the balancing act you had to do, right? There's a legend and then there's the real mom, right?
Well, you know, it's she was a very down-to-earth, funny comedian more than she was a nude performer. I mean, you know, we're talking the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, things were very different in those days, and most of her act was about comedy, and it was, you know, I almost have to see it to believe it. All I can tell you is that I laughed the first time I ever saw these films, and I laugh every time I see them. So they're pretty funny and interesting, and give you also a glimpse of show business that few people have seen and most people find interesting.
And growing up, we understand there are only the two of you, you and your mom. You didn't meet your dad till later.
That's correct. I didn't meet my father until I was 22. I didn't even learn who he was until I was 17. My mother was a very independent person, and she had a child because she wanted a child, and she kept me by her side and put me to work almost immediately. My first job with her was in England during the early 50s, and she used to pin her costumes together with these straight pins with porcelain tops. And she'd unpin them and throw them into the audience. But she couldn't get pins in England at the time because they were still suffering from the aftermath of the war. So I used to have to go out to the audience every night after the show and pick up all the used pins.
Oh, no.
Oh, my.
And eventually I became her dresser. She used to, her act was in 2 parts. And in between, she did a costume change in a shadow box. And it was a small shadow box, and at 8 years old, I was a small person, and all you could see were my hands as I would hold her dress up so she could step into it, and I'd zip it up and all that. So, yes, it was just the 2 of us, and it was a very unusual but pretty wonderful life. The more I look back at it, the more I appreciate it.
Did she have to shelter you from some of the aspects of showbiz?
No. There was, it was a very different existence. The second part of her act had 4 showgirls in it, for example, and I used to get paid a quarter to put the body paint on their backs.
Oh, my. What did the body paint look like? Well, were there designs?
No, it was a flesh-colored paint that sort of softened the light so there was no glare. My mother used it too. Most performers who appear on stage use it sort of just, how do I call it, evens out all the imperfections, shall we say.
Okay. So what was, forgive me for not knowing this, but what was your mother's act aside from being a burlesque dancer? Was there a story being told while she did her show?
Well, actually, there was this, she did, because you could do it in those days, the same act. It was called Psychology of a Stripteaser. Have you the faintest idea about the private thoughts of an exotic dancer? Well, the things that go on in a stripteaser's mind would give you no end of surprise. But if you're psychologically inclined, there's more to see than meets the eye. For example, when I raise my skirts with slyness and dexterity, I'm mentally computing just how much I'll give to charity. And it goes on like that.
Wow.
So, and actually she would remove her clothes from the inside out. So basically, by the end of the act, she was still almost just as covered as she had been at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty exciting.
Some wonderful footage of her act in the presentation, so people get to see what she really did.
Did you get to know your aunt, June Havoc?
I did know June. I wasn't. It's very funny. June was a very unusual woman. I used to say, for anybody who knows the musical, it was mainly about my grandmother, who took these 2 kids on the road in vaudeville when they were very little. And June was the original star of the show. And she really had to support the family for 10 years. And we didn't get along very well, to be honest, and I really didn't like her. But I have to give her credit for her childhood because, as I said, she supported the family until she ran away because she couldn't stand her mother. And I think that she inherited all her mother's bad qualities, and my mother got all the good ones, the humor, the drive, the ambition. What happens with siblings, very often they're sort of mirror images of each other.
Was there a turning point in your mom's life when she was considering doing something else in showbiz?
Well, she gave up her act when I was about 13, and she did summer stock. Auntie Mame was her best show because it reflected her. And I still had a job because it had 14 costume changes, so that was good for me. And eventually she went on to have her own television show, and that was probably her at her best because she just had this great sense of humor. And I have some wonderful clips from that. I have a clip with Liberace, Woody Allen, Paul Lynde. I mean, some very funny things.
So, your experience in all of that, did it jade you to, is that the right word, jade, to showbiz in general? Are you not starry-eyed around people that are in showbiz the way most of us might be?
You know, I think everybody is impressed with people whose talent they appreciate. And I know my mother there's a clip of Bob Hope in this footage. And when she had it, had to go to Bob Hope to ask his permission to use it. And in her diary, she says how nervous she is about seeing and meeting Bob Hope again. Mm-hmm. So, you know, some people in Hollywood and in show business are just down-to-earth, wonderful people that you can enjoy and who enjoy you. And then there's some people in show business who are so full of themselves.
Uh-oh. You still there, Erik? Uh-oh, he went away.
I'm right here.
Okay, there you are. You blanked out. Okay, there are some people who are so full of themselves, that's where it ended.
Oh, yeah, there's some people who are very self-aware and lovely to be with. I mean, Carol Channing in particular, I remember, and Liza Minnelli are people that I just always love being around. And then there's some who I will not mention who are just a pain in the you-know-what.
Oh, really? Now, the two you named, Liza Minnelli and Carol Channing, they seem like really nice people from our perspective, the average audience person.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think you get to see in film, and certainly even more so in live presentation, is the real person behind the performance. I think that's one of the things that, I don't know if you saw the Golden Globes, but they were wonderful to see the real people and see how wonderful they were. And in this, you know, Jackie Gleason is in this and clowning around, and it's just the show business people, especially from those days, were hard-working people who just earned their living by performing in front of people, as opposed to putting together the wing of an airplane.
Right.
It seems like when you met your dad, then he sort of took you and schooled you into the art of filmmaking. Did you fall in love with that right away?
Well, you know, actually, yes, he did do that, and he wanted me to sort of follow in his footsteps as a director. But my forte has always been more both as an editor for my documentary work, and I love performing, you know. So, but he did school me, and it was because when we met at 22, the only chance I had to get to know him and he got to know me was by working together, because he, like my mother, worked all their life. That was their life, was their work. So if you wanted to get to know them, you had to work with them.
And was your mom okay with you working with your dad?
Well, in the beginning, she didn't want anybody to know about the relationship because she was very sensitive about her reputation. She had me because she wanted a child, and she chose Otto because of his brains and his talent, which were phenomenal. And she wanted those traits sort of inherited by her child. Mm-hmm. But she didn't want anybody to know that she was basically an unwed mother because of what she did for a living. And it was only after she died that Otto adopted me.
Oh, my.
How did she feel about the portrayals of her?
You mean in Gypsy?
Yeah.
Oh my God, this was the most probably the greatest honor of her life was this musical, because first of all, it was put together by some of the greatest talents on Broadway, and they really made one of the greatest musicals that's ever been on Broadway. And the first time we saw it was at an out-of-town tryout. I think it was in Philadelphia or Boston. And she cried all the way through it. It was just one of those moments for her, as you can imagine, to see your life sort of fictionalized in this touching and moving way. Was really a great thrill.
Did that change anything for her? Was her fame elevated in any way, or was she changed in any way?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, she knew that the musical would keep her fame alive. I mean, how many strippers can you name these days? I don't think any except for Gypsy Rose Lee. But more than that, it was the first time she ever made any money without really working hard for it. And this was also a thrill.
What do the up and coming actors feel when they view someone like your mother with her magnitude of just persevering?
You know, I don't know. I only know the people that I've met who have been in the show. And the actresses who play my grandmother, who has the principal role in the show, are all obsessed with doing a job with some of the hardest songs to sing that were ever written for a Broadway show. And the people who play my mother just want to get it right, because there's this wonderful transition from a shy teenager into a renowned star almost within minutes in the show. And it's a wonderful transformation, but it's a hard piece to play. So they all want to know how to get it right. And that's always fun, too.
The title of the show is Together, Wherever We Go, Gypsy Rose Lee, the life of the legendary burlesque performer Gypsy Rose Lee. It's a one-man show being put on by Erik Lee Preminger. He's our guest. He's going to be doing the show here in Florida, down in Naples. Where's my notes? Here at the Theater Zone, which is next Wednesday. I went to the website for the Theater Zone. I don't think they have your show up there yet. I don't know. I couldn't find it. Theater.zone, is that right?
Mm-hmm. It is Theater Zone. That is correct.
Theater Zone, okay. And so, is this going to be a first time doing the show in Florida, or have you done it here before?
This is my first time I've done the show in Florida, but I think I mentioned earlier I have a lot of experience of Florida because, my mother played Miami all the time. Just about every year we drive down to Florida to do the show. And there was the movie Wind Across the Everglades, which we shot in Everglades, Florida. And I scouted locations there for a movie that my father made. And we were going to shoot it in Naples, but there was some union difficulty, and we didn't shoot there. But I've always loved Florida because I consider it part of my childhood, if you will. And not to mention the weather, which is a lot nicer than here, where it's pouring rain right now.
You have embarked on a variety of topics through the specials that you have done, from the very serious, from your treatment programs for pregnant drug addicts, and then you also did some on the space station.
Right, you are very well informed. Yes, probably my favorite job was working on this morning show for KGO TV here in San Francisco, because it was, I imagine, like being a B-picture director. You have this hour a day that you have to fill, and if you can make it interesting, they'll let you do a lot of sort of, I wouldn't call them public affairs shows, but you can find people who the public deserves to know about, and you can show them in a way that they wouldn't see otherwise. And the woman who ran the home for pregnant drug addicts was a wonderful woman. And I did a show for, guide dogs for the disabled. That We should have seen a television studio with like 150 dogs and their handlers. It was a mess.
Oh, how fun! How fun!
Really.
So
really
the title of the show, Together Wherever We Go, to me implies that you were very close to your mother, and everything you've said so far also kind of confirms that. Can you tell us more about what the title is implying?
Well, from my mother, when I was 6 months old, my mother wrapped me in a blanket, put me next to her in the front seat of her car, and drove to Cleveland to do her act. And I was literally with her continuously until I started high school. And then after high school, she stopped. When I was in high school, she'd stopped doing her act, but she was doing summer stock, and we used to spend the summers traveling around the country. And so, yes, we were probably closer than most mothers and their sons, and which had its pros and cons. I mean, by the time, eventually there had to be the separation, and that was harder, I think, for both of us. Adolescents are never the nicest people in the world, and I certainly fell into that category. But the closeness never really stopped. She was warm. She was loving. She was a wonderful woman, and I've always felt very privileged. I mean, my life has been one blessing after another. I do consider myself one of the luckiest people on the face of the earth, and that's due in large measure to her.
What a fabulous role model your mother was, and you are a role model right now with all of the different facets that you're allowing so generously for people to see.
Well, it's fun to show them because, again, I am proud of my heritage, and I love telling people about it, and they seem to enjoy hearing about it and seeing it. So it's like a win for everybody, but especially for me. Are you there?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I was just still waiting. I thought Larry had a question.
No, it got silent all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, my Lord, we've been disconnected. But I'm glad we have.
In all of the talents and everything that you're doing, what is your most favorite thing aside from the show, your one-man show?
Oh, boy. That's a good question. I actually I have put together, and I hope to be able to show it on Wednesday night, a reel of vaudeville acts from the 1900s to the late 1920s, and it's a wonderful way to sort of show people what entertainment was like in that era. And so that's...
Oh my gosh. Are you still there, Erik? Did they cut him off? His publicist, maybe?
For the audience.
Oh, there they
Oh,
okay,
my gosh. Oh,
Erik,
my gosh.
I don't know what's going on with the phones. It's
Stuff.
crazy. Erik Lee Preminger, what an honor to have you on this show. Thank you so much, and safe travels to Florida next week.
Absolutely, and I hope you'll come to the show, and I'll see you there.
I hope so. All right, thank you, Erik. We'll be right back.
Okay.